What's up, BookTube? Welcome back. My name is Laura if you're new here, and today we're talking about everything that I read in August. Y'all, I had a fan-frickin-tastic reading month. I read 8 books this month. That is like almost double what I would normally do. They were also almost entirely sequels. So one of my goals for the year, which I talk about frequently, is the fact that I'm trying really hard to make my way through series and finish up duologies. And I have so many series that I've started, I've read like the first book of, and then I never touched them again. So I've been trying so hard to read a lot of sequels this year. And in August, of the 8 books that I read, 6 of them were sequels. So like, go me. I am so proud of myself for that. But for my page count for the month, I read a grand total of 2,347 pages, and that's not including the couple of books that I started in August, but I didn't finish them in time, so they're going to be included in my like September wrap up. That's not including those pages, so this is just for books that I started and finished in the month. Like, this is wild for me. I had a fantastic reading month, and like most of them weren't even like graphic novels or short books. Most of them were like full-length novels, which is really rare for me to do. So I don't know what happened this month. I just had a huge reading mojo, and I read constantly. Didn't film very much, so sorry for my very sporadic posting and just general absence on YouTube. But hopefully I had the motivation to film again, so there should be like a more consistent posting schedule in the coming while, so bear with me. But yeah, excellent reading month. I'm so happy with everything that I read. So let's just stop rambling here and get right into the reviews. The first book that I read in August was Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the third and final book in the Brown Sisters trilogy, which is a series of companion novels all centering around the Brown sisters and their love stories. And I love this series so much. Eve Brown is the youngest sister, and she's known for being very flighty and immature, and you know, she basically just kind of takes advantage of her parents' wealth and uses their wealth to not work and kind of have all these fleeting fantasies of what she wants to do with her life, start businesses, and then give up the second things go wrong. And eventually her parents get sick of it, and they tell her that she has no choice but to go off and find her career and find a way to support herself, because they won't just spend her entire life supporting her. So she gets very upset, and she kind of runs away, and she ends up at this bed and breakfast where she saw a help wanted sign for a chef, and she's like, well, I could probably do that. So she shows up, and the interview goes horribly wrong, which becomes even worse when she accidentally runs over the owner of the bed and breakfast, and she feels guilty for injuring him, so she stays to help him run the bed and breakfast while he is recovering. She turns out to be very good at that job, and they also end up falling in love. It is the grumpy sunshine pairing, the kind of dislike to lovers. It was just so cute. Also, both main characters are on the autism spectrum, so that was really nice to read as well. The male lead already knows that he's autistic at the beginning of the story, and he's very open about it, and the female lead learns about her autism after interacting with him, and it was just such a wonderful book. I loved it so much. This one I gave 4 stars. This series is just so much fun, and I highly recommend them. Eve Brown was actually my least favorite book in the series, but I still gave it 4 stars. Like, that's just how good these books are. The steamy scenes, they were less frequent, but holy shit. Oh, goddamn. Talia Hibbert went all out for this one. It had me blushing, and I literally sell dildos for a living. Like, these kind of things don't make me blush, but that one did. Next up was Fierce Like a Firestorm by Lana Popovic. This is the sequel to Wicked Like a Wildfire, which I read I think about 3 years ago, and it took me until now to get to the conclusion. My bad. Like I said, terrible with series, like especially duologies. I don't know why, because it's literally just 2 books. All I have to do is read 1 book, and then I would be done the series. But no, it takes me 4 fucking ever to get to them. But I finally got to this one. First of all, look at this cover. Like, it's so beautiful. Truly obsessed. It's stunning. But this series is a really beautiful witch story, but their magic is different from like other magic that I've seen before. It was very unique. They have what they call gleams, and each witch has a different kind of gleam. It just sounds so wonderful. Like, it's very cottagecore. I love it. But they live in a small town in Montenegro. The setting and the atmosphere of this book is impeccable. But these three, the mother and her two daughters, live together. They're kind of in hiding. They have to keep their powers very much hidden. But the daughters learn that they're actually part of a much larger coven of witches. And there is also some dark evil forces kind of hanging out that they have to deal with. I'm being very vague with the synopsis, partially because I read the first book 3 years ago. The details are vague, but also for this one it's book 2, so I don't want to spoil things from book 1. So this was a very messy synopsis, but basically it's a really pretty witch story with a gorgeous atmosphere and delicious descriptions of food. That's really all that I'm going to say about it, I guess, because I don't really know how else to describe this book without spoiling it, so I'll just leave it there. This one was pretty good. I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't my favorite thing ever, but I didn't dislike it. I found the same thing with the first book, where it was very, very slow until all of a sudden it wasn't. I feel like this series is mostly character driven. Like, there is obviously a plot as well, but it seems to be mainly about the family relationships. This book also took an unexpected turn. It became a portal fantasy, which is my favorite genre of fantasy. If you did not know that, I'm obsessed with portal fantasy, so that was really nice. I won't go into detail as to how that happened, obviously, but it became a portal fantasy and I was so here for it. I think I liked book 2 better than book 1 as a whole. I think on Goodreads I gave book 1 like a 4-star. I might change that though, because the first half of book 1 was so slow, but the last half was so good. But Fierce Like a Firestorm, it didn't have any like great, fantastic moments, but it was like a steady good the entire way through, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Next up was Crazy Stupid Bromance by Lyssa K. Adams. This is the 3rd book in the Bromance book club series, which is also a adult contemporary romance series of companion novels that center around the elite men of Texas. They're like sports stars and like big shot millionaire kind of guys. They are all going through kind of relationship problems, so they start a book club together where they read romance novels that were written by women for women to kind of use them as manuals, but not in like a skeezy way that sounds creepy, but they use these romance novels to learn what women actually want, how they want to be treated, as well as to kind of break down ideas of toxic masculinity and the patriarchy within themselves and their friend group, and learn how to talk about their emotions and open up to their partners as well as to each other, and like learn how to be better husbands and better friends and just better men in general. It is like the most wholesome thing ever. So book 3 follows 2 characters that we met in book 2. The one lead is the owner of a cat cafe, and the other is a like IT hacker kind of guy who uses his computer genius powers for good these days, not so much in his past, but now he's on the right track. They met in the last book, became really, really good friends, and now they're just best friends, and obviously things go from there. This also had a plot point to it that I wasn't expecting, so definitely like look out for trigger warning if you were sensitive to like loss of a parent. I haven't dealt with that personally, and like even I was like, wow, this is heavy. So it's definitely a heavier romance novel, but still fantastic. It still had its moments of humor and just light, joyful romance that I adored. I gave it 4 stars. I don't know if it's my favorite in the series, but I did really enjoy it. I think the first book is still my favorite. It's just so good that it'll be hard to beat, but the rest of the books have been fantastic as well, and I can't wait to get to book 4, which I'm actually going to be reading in September, so I can't wait for it. Next up was Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. This is the sequel to the Strange the Dreamer duology. I read the first book in this, I think also about 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago now, I'm not even sure. I have a complicated relationship with this book. I absolutely fucking adored the first half of Strange the Dreamer. Laszlo Strange is easily one of my favorite characters who has ever existed, ever. I love him. And then when the romance kicked in, it completely ruined it for me. Like, it just made things so bad. So I didn't really want to read book 2, but I'm kind of glad that I did. It still wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. It didn't quite redeem itself from the first half of Strange the Dreamer, but it was still enjoyable, and once again, pleasantly surprised with this turning into a portal fantasy. I'm having a good month for that, apparently. I was not at all expecting this to turn into a portal fantasy, but it did, and I'm so happy about it. That aspect of this book took it up to a 3-star for me. I thought that was just so much fun, and I genuinely want this author to write more books set in these worlds and to explore the portals and all these things, because it was such an interesting plot point that was kind of introduced about halfway through this book, and I want more of it so badly, and I think she is going to write more of it. I hope so, at least. I would kill for that. But synopsis of this duology before I get ahead of myself here. Strange the Dreamer is about a man named Laszlo Strange who was abandoned as an infant to this library. They were going to put him up for adoption, but the library kind of chose him, and he ended up staying there and becoming a librarian. He has been obsessed with this almost mythical town called Weep that everyone has forgotten the actual name to, so they just call it Weep. And he's obsessed with fairy tales and the whole lore surrounding it. Everyone thinks that he's kind of a joke because of it, until one day a strange man appears and says that he is looking for volunteers to help him save the lost city of Weep. And of course, Laszlo Strange volunteers immediately, and he gets to ride off into the sunset going towards his dream with all the people who ever made fun of him watching him go, and it was just the most wonderful thing ever. And then we get to Weep and things go from there, and in this book things continue from where they left off, which was in a very rocky place at the end of the first book. So we just picked up right where we left off in the first book in this one, and I actually kind of enjoyed the plot for this one. Still didn't like the romance, and I didn't like where Laszlo's character went, but for the most part it was still really good. I so desperately wish the romance hadn't ruined this book for me, but I'm still glad that I finally got to book 2. I then read The Deck of Omens by Lynne Herman. This is the sequel to The Devouring Grey, which I read I think last year, so it didn't take me too long to get to the sequel of this one, so I'm proud of myself for that. This one is set in a small town, I think it's like upstate New York. It's somewhere in America, and in this town there are the 4 founding families, and they all have some kind of unique power that keeps this thing called the Grey from destroying everything. It's some monstrous thing where if you go into the Grey, you most likely won't come out. So the 4 families, they have to kind of keep things under control, and they're worshipped as like basically gods in this town for being their savior against the Grey. And it follows one member from each family. They're all in high school, they all kind of know each other, except for one who's like just moved back there with her mom, and shenanigans ensue, dark evil forces, that kind of thing. Pretty fun. I didn't love the first book. I think I gave it like 3 stars. I gave the sequel 3 stars as well. Like, I know people love this series, and I can see why it's well loved. It's just not quite for me for some reason. I can't really pinpoint it. It's just not like my favorite thing ever, but I don't dislike it either, you know. It's very like middle of the road for me. Not bad, but not great either. But yeah, so 3 stars for this one. Glad I got to it, but it's not gonna like stay in my brain, you know? Next up was Continuum by Chella Man. This is one of the Pocket Change collective books. Chella Man is a genderqueer, deaf, Jewish artist that I've been following on Instagram for several years. He did a really big documentation project when he was going on testosterone and throughout his whole gender transition, and I found him through his art actually, and I'm just in love with him. He is amazing. I was so excited to see that he was publishing his first book, and I loved it. It was so good. It's a very short one. I think it's like 65 pages or so, and it's just kind of him talking about his life. It's a memoir and him growing up wanting so desperately to see somebody like him, to see somebody who is all of his identities wrapped into one, and he could just never find it, so he decided to become his own representation. And yeah, so he's just this really beautiful soul and this beautiful artist, and the way that he writes is just stunning, and I love this one. I gave it a full 5 stars. I then read Defekt by Nino Cipri. This is the sequel to Finna, which I read I think also last year. I love this so much. This one might be better than the first book, and if you watch my channel, I talk about this book frequently. I loved Finna. It was incredible. I think Defekt was better, which I didn't think was going to be possible, but this was just incredible. So this duology is called the Littenverse. It takes place in a like knockoff IKEA somewhere in Midwestern America, and in this knockoff IKEA, sometimes wormholes open up that take you to different portal universes. This is definitely a portal sci-fi, not a fantasy, but I'm still very happy about it. In the first book, somebody's grandmother gets lost in one of the wormholes, and 2 employees are basically forced to go in after her and protect the customer, even though it's putting their lives at risk. And book 2 follows a character who is kind of friends with one of the people who went into the wormhole, and it takes place the night after book 1, and kind of him dealing with that as he's realizing some things about himself. He got sick, and he's put on this really special inventory night shift that he's never dealt with before, and things go from there. It is wild. I am not going to give any kind of spoilers or like even a synopsis whatsoever about this book, because this is one that you need to go in completely blind. Like, don't read reviews about it, don't try and figure out what the plot is, just read it, because I was not expecting it to go where it did, and I am so happy that I didn't know. I think that if I'd known beforehand, it definitely would not have had the same kind of impact, so just go into it blind. It was incredible. Like, I cannot explain to you the level of absurdity that this had, but it was ridiculous, and it still worked so well. This book is filled with just absolute weirdness. It's like kind of I don't know how to explain it, because like it is really wholesome sci-fi mixed with a kind of ominous horror feeling, but the horror doesn't come from the sci-fi elements, it comes from the commentary on capitalism and working in a retail setting. And it was fascinating to kind of analyze how I was feeling while I was reading this and which parts were making me feel the ways that I did. It was just wonderful. Okay, like I'm just gonna stop there before I give too much away, but like just read this series, okay? You could read book 2 without reading book 1, but still read book 1 because it was amazing. And I of course gave this one a full 5 stars. It also went directly to my favorite shelf. I adored this and I will read it again and again and again and probably love it just as much as I did the first time. And the last book that I read was Abbott 1973 by Saladin Ahmed. This one is a fantasy comic book that has to do with magic. It takes place in Chicago in 1973 and it follows a woman who is working for Chicago's first all-black newspaper, and they're following the story of Chicago possibly electing its first black mayor. This one was my fault. I didn't realize that this was part of a larger series, so I read this having read none of the previous works, having no context, and very quickly learned that there's a lot more to the story than where it starts off in this volume. So that was my bad. I tried not to let it affect my rating too much because that obviously wouldn't be very fair, so I ended up giving it 3 stars. It did do a pretty good job at kind of telling me what happened in the volumes before this one, so I wasn't actually that lost. I would just definitely recommend reading whatever comes before it before getting to this volume because you will be confused. But otherwise though, I found the pacing to be a little off. It was like really slow until all of a sudden it wasn't, and I found the moments of like actual plot to go by way too fast. I would have liked to kind of sit in them a little bit longer. I loved the characters. They were definitely the strongest part of this, as well as the art style. It was stunning and the setting and atmosphere were just like wow, gorgeous. And so that was really good, but just the plot, again, partially my fault, but partially just didn't quite get into the plot as much as I would have hoped. But overall I gave it 3 stars, so I still did enjoy it. Honestly, I'm not sure if I'm going to continue with this series or read the story that came before it. I liked it, but I don't think I liked it enough to kind of invest my time into it, you know? But it was still a good read. This one is an arc that I got from NetGalley, and this book is going to be released on October 12th, so thank you so much to NetGalley for providing me with this arc. I appreciate it. Okay, and those are all the books that I read in the month of August. Once again, a fantastic reading month for me. I'm so happy with this. I now have so many less series that I'm in the middle of now, so very happy about that. Very proud of myself. Let me know if you've read any of these books down in the comments and what you thought of them, or just tell me your favorite book that you read in August. I would love to hear your thoughts. But in the meantime, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye!